seeing as you're both a CPA as well as are an owner of your own firm, in your mind, which career is primary? Is it an entrepreneurial career that you see yourself as, or more of an accountant?
So for me, that's first of all, it's a great question. And for me, I definitely view myself as an entrepreneur. I come from a family that emphasized starting your own business and being in business for yourself. My dad had his own business. My grandfather, my uncles, my dad's uncles had their own business. Um, my grandfather was a butcher. My uncles owned a car wash and a pharmacy, and so very entrepreneurial family. And my dad had a business. Um, the reason why I went into this profession was to one day be my own business owner, and that was the goal. And the CPA was sort of um, the means to the end.
Wow, okay.
Yeah. So that's very personal. Other people
Hmm.
really enjoy um the accounting side of it. And I do too. I do too. I like the business side of it, and we can talk about that in a little bit more detail. But yeah, for me personally, I definitely view myself as an entrepreneur first.
Hmm. So, is there any what made you choose accounting as that avenue to get into your own business versus, let's say, a different trade like plumbing or an electrician? Like, why was accounting the direction you wanted to go when choosing to own your own business?
It's a great question too. Boy, these are good questions. Um, so for me, I graduated high school and I was basically told that I was going to college by my parents. My parents were like, "Hey, you're going to college." And I said, "Okay." And so I got into a couple colleges. I applied to a bunch. I didn't get into most of them. I got into a few. And I went and I toured them, and my parents, said they were going to help me with tuition and room and board. And so I was going to college. And so from there, I basically had a choice, was what was I going to do in college? And for me, I had always wanted to be a lawyer in my mind, and I had read a lot of John Grisham books. I loved The Firm, and there were a bunch of books like that I just thought being a lawyer was cool. Didn't really know much about it. Oh, you know what? I had a cousin who was a lawyer, and I got an internship making photocopies for him in high school. So for some reason, that just was attractive to me. The idea of like wearing a suit and having a secretary and everyone kind of treating you with this respect. So that was attractive to me. And when I got to school, what I realized was being a lawyer would mean I would have to go to law school. And my parents didn't said they weren't going to help me with law school. So I was going to have to take out loans. So that was not as exciting to me.
Mm.
Um, So I ultimately went to the business school, and when I graduated, it was like right when the internet was starting. It was the .com boom, and people were starting companies like diapers.com and dogfood.com and amazon.com and all these companies that didn't really do anything, but one day they would be worth something. So people were investing
Mm.
all this money, and that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a .com millionaire. That's what I wanted in my mind. So I went to school for, marketing and IT, and I graduated and maybe finance. I can't remember. I might have gotten like a minor in finance, but business focused stuff.
Mm.
And I graduated, and all along my parents were saying to me, go back to my parents, "Hey, Brian, you should check out accounting. You've always been kind of good at math. You should check out accounting." I said, "I don't want to be an accountant. Accountants are so nerdy. They're like, they like sit in the dark with those like adding machines and those green visors, and they're like click, 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 ching, click, 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 ching, and it's such a nerdy profession. I don't want to do that. And so I went off to become a .com guy. But when I graduated college, um, it was, and you probably don't remember this, and some people might, but
Mm,
the .com bubble first.
right.
And so what that meant was all these companies where they were all these people who were investing like millions of dollars into diapers.com and dogfood.com basically went away. And all those companies went away and only a few survived, like amazon.com
Mm,
and which was a bookstore. I don't know why they survived, but they did. They were a bookstore, and then people bought books from them. And now, obviously, they're big company.
right.
Um, so there was like no there was the job market dried up. You probably know or remember that some airplanes crashed into buildings in New York. That happened like 2 months after I graduated, or 3 months after I
Wow.
graduated. So
Wow.
so everything froze, and there was nothing available for a kid who was graduating.
Oh my gosh.
And so my parents, again, were like, "Hey, Brian, remember we've been saying you should go be an accountant? What if you try accounting? Like you now you're like striking out. We tried it your way. You wanted to do this, you want to do this, and you kind of hit some tough spots. They said we have some friends who are accountants. Why don't you go start talking to them? And I went and I talked to them, and one of them said, "Oh, talk to our hiring manager." And apparently, the interesting thing about accounting is they're always looking for young people. And that
Mm.
exists today. And I want to come back to that point because
Oh,
they're
absolutely.
always looking for young people who want to become accountants. And the guy told me, hey, if you go back to school and you get a degree in accounting and you take that CPA exam, we'll give you a job
Mm.
and we'll give you a good job with a good salary. And I was like, all right, well, I need a job. So that makes sense. My parents were like, yeah, you'll take a fifth year of college. And so I went back to school at UCLA and I took a fifth year and I got my accounting. I don't know if it's like a double major or a master's or it's a fifth year. I don't know.
Hmm.
I didn't really get like a degree, but I didn't really need one. And then I sat and I took the CPA exam and they gave me a job and I worked my butt off and I forget how we got started on this.
Oh, no worries. No worries. I was just asking, what about accounting? Why did you choose that as an avenue to operate your own business?
Yeah, and so the answer is my parents told me so.
Mm.
I did what my parents said, and
Hmm.
it turns out they were kind of right. So they once in a while they have good ideas, and they, as much as I didn't want to admit it, they had a good idea with it, and it's worked out very well.
Mm.
It's a nice profession, and we can talk about that a little bit more, but um, people can find their own way in accounting at whatever speed they like to operate at.
Mm.
You can go to work at a big firm and work on big companies, the biggest companies in the world. You can go to work at a small firm and work with entrepreneurs and help them make decisions about their business. Um, I want to tell you something about COVID that really was exciting for me in my business. Um, yeah, so people can really find their own way with accounting. Depending on if you're a female and you want to work with female entrepreneurs and help empower them, you can do that.
Mm.
If you're um, Chinese and you want to work with
Mm.
Chinese entrepreneurs, you can do that. There's just all these different ways
Right.
that you can really carve out a niche that's very personal to
Mm.
you. And there's going to be plenty of work. There's plenty of work, and it's really an interesting field.
Wow, I had no idea accounting was so malleable. I had no idea there was so many ways to specialize into different areas. and especially like you were saying, different markets, like choosing to
Yeah,
specialize and
absolutely.
endorse. I'm curious, because I definitely want to touch on that. How did you transition from, as you mentioned, joining a, is it right to call it
Big
a
firm.
corporate firm, a big
Big firm.
firm? How was the transition from, or your path from going to that big firm and having a solid job and working your way up the ranks to now transitioning and to owning your own firm?
It's another great question. Um, when we graduate college, oh, I know. I want to make sure I touch on these 2 points, so I'm just jotting down some notes.
Oh
When
my
we
gosh,
when
wonderful.
we graduate college, you basically have the background in accounting. Like it basically tells you the process. And the math is easy. The math is, it's addition and subtraction for the most part. It's going to be easy. The hardest thing is the process. You have to remember what comes first, what comes second, what comes after that. You do this set of addition and subtraction first, then you do this set of addition and subtraction, then you do this one. You do this one for taxes, you do this one for business. So there's some remembering the order of things, but the math is super easy, and we have calculators. So like and spreadsheets. So like it's just easy. Um, everyone has phobia. It's like oh my god, I'm bad at math. I could never
Mm,
do that. But you'd be surprised. It's actually not that hard. But that being said, when we all graduate, it's very intimidating. And it's like, oh my God, what am I going to do? How am I going to translate from going to classes in college to getting a job? And because a job has got to be way different. So the firms have kind of a program that and they don't call it this enough, but it's basically like a trainee program. And they basically let you in, they give you a very nice salary, and they work your butt off. But you really get a amazing real world paid experience where you learn how to be an accountant because you don't learn it in college. You learn it by going to work at a firm. So the best thing you can do is find a bigger firm. Doesn't have to be one of the big four. And I didn't work at one of the big four. I worked at one of the second tier. The big four used to be big eight, and now it's down to four. And because of corporate consolidations and stuff, and now
mm,
they've got a bunch of second tier, and there's tons of firms. So you can always, no matter where you live or where you're at, if you don't want the biggest, most um, competitive stuff, you can always find something that's going to be your speed.
wow.
And they give you this amazing education, teaching you all the ropes, how to be an employee, how to be a consultant, how to, be a professional. And they teach you how to dress, how to act, how to talk, how to write reports, how to, all these things that are so crucial for business. And in my mind, that was the best thing that happened to me. And I spent 5 years there, which was probably a little bit on the short side. Some people spend longer. I might have spent 6 years there. Some people spend like 10, some people spend like 15. It just depends on everybody's personality and how much
Mm,
they like the competition. Because it is competitive and they work your butt off. They definitely, you know, working on Saturdays, working on Sundays, there's
mm,
working late nights. There's a culture of work ethic. And yeah, so that's really where you get the foundation for being an accountant, and it's fantastic. I mean, it's hard, but it's also fun. It's like anything else that's hard. Like you do it, and you're like, wow, I'm kind of digging this. It's kind of enjoyable at the same time. I'm getting satisfaction. I feel good about myself. Like I'm
right.
really like putting in hours and solving problems, and I'm getting ahead. Um, and they give nice bonuses and it's a nice profession. There's a lot of people who burn out and just get tired of it and you've got to find your speed. Um, so how did I transition into owning my own firm? Is that the question?
Yes, sir.
So as I said, I always wanted to be my own boss. And so I left the firm and I kind of started my own consulting company where I wasn't really a CPA anymore, but I was kind of like a part-time CFO, part-time controller. And I had three companies that over time, one of them, I believe it or not, I met on Craigslist. One of them
Wow.
was I can tell you about that in a second. One of them was a company that was a client of the big firm Moss Adams that I worked on. And I was looking for like, oh, one of them was a friend of a friend was starting a mobile technology company and needed me one day a week. And that's the interesting thing for me was they all these young small companies couldn't afford a full-time accounting person or a full-time CFO. So they wanted a one day a week CFO. And I was attracted to that because it gave me flexibility in my job. And it also, I could command more money because I was kind of a consultant. And I also made my own hours and I made my own um, agenda and I could kind of switch around my schedule. And it felt more in line with my personal values. So I was very attracted to that. Later, after I did that for like 8 years or almost 10 years, I realized that being the CFO of companies always meant that no matter what, no matter how good the work I was doing was, no matter how good my recommendations were, no matter how much vision I had about the financial success or tough times of the company, I wasn't the final decision maker.
Hmm.
It was always going to be the owner that was the decision maker. I could just make a recommendation. I could say, hey, look, here's the writing on the wall. I see that the company is going to go through a hard time for 6 months. I see the company is going to go through a big time, a big growth for a year. I could tell them all these things. They would make the decision about what to do with that information. Even
Wow.
if
Right.
I had the idea, I was like, hey, you're going through all these growth periods. You guys are going to make a lot of money. I think you should give everyone big bonuses. And they would say, no, I don't want to do that. I want to, you know, try and reinvest the money and then sell the company or whatever they wanted to do that wasn't necessarily aligned with what my recommendation was because
Mhm.
they got to make the decision.
Right.
And ultimately, that's the thing that pushed me back into finding a way to be my own boss and having my own business.
Whoa, that's so interesting. Yeah, having control over enacting your own vision versus merely suggesting to someone else's. That makes complete sense why you transitioned to be an entrepreneur. And
Absolutely.
and since the days were so since the days sound so strenuous at those big firms, at the corporate firms, and now you're working for yourself, how is the average day compared? Is it still very competitive? Or how would you say your average day is now?
Yeah, I mean, the only difference is the competitive nature of the business and the stressful nature of the business is still there in the context that, there's demands from clients.
Hmm.
There's situations where, you know, I'll give you an example. If I have a really great client and they need a specialized service, like let's say, for example, that I've got a client that wants to sell their business and I've been giving them advice and I'm kind of their guy and they've been my client for a couple of years, but they need a CPA, a specialized CPA who's going to give them a business valuation, who's going to say your business is worth 39.2 million or whatever the number is, 8.1 million. They need to find someone new who can do that for them because I can't do it because I don't have that specific expertise. So then the business valuation guy, even though I'm going to refer them, might say, hey, Brian is not doing everything he could do for you. You should really come over to our firm because we can do everything. We can do so much more. Let me show you. So there's competition in that sense, that there's competition outside of my silo. But the
Hmm.
nice thing about having my own firm is there's no internal competition.
Oh.
So I don't have other partners trying to squeeze me or tell me, hey, why didn't you do this? Or why did you make this decision? Or why did you, make that decision? And in the environment that I'm trying to foster, we don't have that type of competition internally either. So like if I'm up to 8 people, and if I've got 2 people who are doing similar things, they're each operating independently of each other. There's not a competition where they're being measured against each other, and with like there was a lot of that at the big firm where people are measured against each other and there's
Hmm.
internal competition. And I didn't feel like that was the type of environment that I wanted to be a part of.
Right. Wow. And
Now,
yeah, that sounds like it'd be really, really tiring. It makes sense why so many people get burnt out if there's always that constant like over looming presence of like, oh, did you do the right thing? That makes sense
yeah,
completely.
and there's a lot of that, and there's a lot of, accountants are always very judgmental of the way that other accountants do work. And it's similar to being a lawyer or anything else. If you think about like if you're writing a term paper for school and you let one of your friends review it, how are they going to what feedback are they going to give you? Are they just going to be like, hey, everything looks great? Or are they going to be tough on you? Or are they going to be easy on you? How are they going to give you feedback? And so accountants kind of have the same thing, except everyone inherently is going to be tough on you because they want to show what a tough and smart and sharp reviewer they are. Because it
Uh,
makes like it makes them look better if they find the gotcha. If they find that smoking gun where you did something wrong, it makes me look really good that I'm the one who found it. I found where you screwed up. So there's a lot of that
mm,
culture. And I think it's helpful in some circumstances because it forces everyone to be on their, be their best.
mm,
But it also can be a little bit toxic. And I think that's one of the
right.
challenges that big firms have, probably law firms, definitely accounting firms. But ultimately, that's why there's all sorts of different avenues, and like you said, it's very malleable. Some people thrive in that type of competitive environment. You think about like people who are varsity athletes, for example, in high school. They're obviously it's like, oh, is this guy going to take my starting position? And so or maybe people in theater, they're like, oh, is this guy going to take my role? So there's people who are already in that level of competition all throughout their lives, and people thrive in it.
Hmm.
Personally, it wasn't for me.
Mm. And have you noticed any shift, I guess, in the industry? And I feel like this could go a lot of ways, but I guess right now, just like specifically in that culture, have you noticed any gradual shift in the industry
Yeah, it's a
towards the
great
way you
question.
try to foster your business?
Let me tell you something. I worked with a guy when I was the CFO who completely changed my philosophy on work. And he basically treated everyone like extended family. And he really was invested in the growth of his people. And he read books about how to build great teams and how to make companies more productive through happy workers that felt empowered to make good decisions. And that really rubbed off on me. And it changed the way that I felt about work. And I remember those years being so I really enjoyed going to work because I saw like a team that all had each other's backs and was really like working together toward a common goal. And it felt like a team. It didn't feel like a bunch of individual competitors who would step on each other, stab each other in the back. It felt like a team who was lifting each other up and everybody had their role on the team. Um, so that had a huge impact on me. One thing I want to say about accounting, and I know I've kind of, pointed out, I've pointed out some things that aren't necessarily favorable. One thing that's really interesting about accounting right now is because of the things I've mentioned, the long hours, the competition, the the environment of like gotchas, there has been a massive exodus where young people are looking at computer programming, other finance jobs, venture capital, things like that. And there is a serious hole or there's a gap in new people coming into the accounting world.
Mm,
And the interesting thing about that is, number one, the accountants who are like 60 and 50 and even 70 are like, whoa, we got to figure out a way to attract these young people because the young people are the lifeblood of the accountant. A 70-year-old guy is not going to be grinding out, 60, 80-hour weeks. He wants to have his team do that. So um, they need to figure out how they're going to attract the younger talent. And while that sounds like their problem, it actually creates an opportunity for young people. Because if you're in high school and you're saying, well, I want a job that's going to make a lot of money and or a comfortable amount of money and is going to be something that I can create the life I want. Accountant has this Accounting has this vacancy
mm,
and they need more accountants right now. And so that doesn't mean that like you have to go become a cog in someone else's machine. It means that you can go learn about the machine and then make your own machine. And so and like I said, there's, if, and I was picking on Chinese people, but if you're Chinese, you can decide to work with Chinese entrepreneurs. And just because my buddy is Chinese, and so that came to mind. But
mm,
if you're a female, you can work with female business owners. Or if you like to work with elders, you can work with retirees. Or if you like to work with young people, you can work with college students and teach them about. So you can find your groove and find what makes you happy and go with that niche. And, right now, because of the larger scale demographic where there's this huge need for accountants, all the people who used to be accountants are retiring, and there's very few young people, even people my age and younger. I mean, I'm getting to be old, but people your age and between our ages who became accountants. They all became other things. So
wow.
there's an interesting opportunity right now for young people who want to become accountants.
Right. Yeah, and I really appreciate the way you're sharing it because I feel like it provides such a new perspective. I have a friend of mine who went to high school and he's choosing to do something different, but it's like he's choosing to become an electrician in hopes of one day owning his own electrician business. So seeing
Yep.
accounting as the same thing as an avenue to own your own business, I feel is such an insight that most that doesn't come to mind immediately when I've heard accounting in the past. So it makes so much sense and it's such a good.
I really like that. And I have some clients who have done that and they make a nice living, and ultimately, just like electricians, it comes down to finding the niche that you want to work on. Like let's talk about electricians for a second. You could be an electrician who works on uh only government contracts
Mm,
like schools or big projects. In general, those tend to move very slow, but tend to be bigger jobs because there's a lot more red tape. You can work on houses like small houses where you do the entire house. You can work on high end houses where you need a team because there's lots of different electrical needs. You can work just on audio video stuff, so you're kind of specialized in people who have home theaters and alarm systems and things like that. Um, Tons you can work with a company, and maybe there's people who have electric needs just dedicated to their company. Um, Lately, I've been working with a lot of renewable energy companies,
mm,
and they need electricians who can handle the conversion of solar into electric energy and storage and plugging it back into the grid. So there's just electrician, like you're saying, like electrician, like yeah, it's some guy who does something with wires or whatever, but it actually can be so malleable, and there's so many different ways that you can make an impact. And yeah, I mean, ultimately owning your own business is awesome. Um, but it's also very challenging
mm,
if you don't have the right background or the right education for it. Because, owning your own business, you have to understand like what's the difference between, give you an example, cash and profit. Let me give you a great example. If you're an electrician and you do a bunch of jobs for people and they're paying you in 30 days or in 60 days or in 90 days, and let's say they're paying you in 90 days, but you have to pay your men today because they just worked at Friday and you want to give them their salary, then how does that work? Like, what happens when I have to pay my expenses today, but I'm not going to get my revenue for 90 days? I need to understand how to run my business based on that. And what happens when I need to buy a van or a ladder or something that costs a lot of money? Do I finance it or do I pay cash? And if I pay cash, is that going to affect my ability to pay my people? So there's a lot of nuances in running a business. And I mean, I know getting an accounting degree is sometimes the opposite. Like if you're going to become an electrician, you're like, hey, I don't want to go to school for 4 years. And besides, there's a lot of problems with college, and it's way too expensive. And there's a lot of problems with college. Not going to discount that, but I also think that there's more to running a business than just you know, saying, okay,
hmm.
I'm starting a business today.
Right.
There's some challenges, and it really helps to find mentors and to find people who have already done it before, and maybe link up with an electrician who is. And the way I did it, by the way, with
Hmm.
my firm, is you link up with some older people who are looking to retire, and then you slowly take over their business.
Oh,
And that's the
wow.
way that I did it with my firm.
Mm, right. And I was wondering what advice you'd have for a young person who's interested in this opening in accounting. And I feel like you partially answered my question, but someone who wants to be successful as an accountant and who wants to be successful, I'm just curious, what is your definition of success?
It's a great question, and I'm still trying to figure that out. But I think the real definition of success is just being happy and just being content with where we are, whatever that is. And like I was saying, there's all different types. You know, Another great thing, by the way, about accounting is it can be done part time. One of the ladies that I partnered with who recently passed away, but she was, the first person that I worked with who basically turned her business over to me. And She worked about 50% of the year. And the rest of the
Wow.
time, she traveled with her life partner, which was her boyfriend, who, they were together for whatever, 40 years or something. And they traveled to, they just had a really wonderful life. And they just,
Mm.
she worked hard, but she didn't, she was at a different phase in life where, uh, that was what she chose to do. And it's really interesting about accounting is you can basically, there's so much stuff to do. There's so much work, especially right now, given the demographics that I mentioned, that um, you can really you can create your own life. You can create your own happiness and find that and create it. For me, I want to talk about this. I mentioned this. I wrote this down. When COVID hit, it was March and it was in the middle of tax season. I don't know if you remember what you were doing when everybody kind of closed down for COVID.
Right. Remember, I was finishing up eighth grade.
Yeah. And did school close?
School closed completely. We had to shut down. It was weird. It was like a two week almost vacation, everyone saw it as, and then it just completely shut down. It was kind of sudden.
Did it go online?
It did. It went completely online. It took a couple of months, but then everything shifted online. And I remember especially when I started high school, my freshman year, was completely online as well.
Yeah. Very strange. And my kids had a similar experience.
Mm,
Um, business can't, business has to still operate. And a lot of business owners facing the challenges that I mentioned earlier with cash flow, needing to pay their people, having serious concerns about, hey, I'm owed money that people are going to pay me in 90 days. And I need to pay my people now, but is that 90-day money going to come? Or now that we have this pandemic and there's all this uncertainty, are the people who owe me money in 90 days, are they going to be here or are they going to be underwater? Or are they going to, what is COVID? Oh, there was a lot of uncertainty. So the government stepped in, and this was at the time when there was really a lot of uncertainty. Nobody knew how bad COVID could really be. We all just were scared.
right.
And the government stepped in and said, hey, we're going to give businesses and small businesses extra money to help them stay afloat while everybody's figuring this out. And they called that the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program. And at the time, people were, the hospital were, everyone was home. The hospital workers, the hospitals were overworked, and people were, going to the hospital and helping out. And, it was really chaos. I mean, there was a lot of uncertainty. And I remember feeling, you know what? I'm not able to go to the hospital and and help people. I'm not able to you know help people in schools or things like that. But the one thing I can do is I can work my butt off, which I know how to do, and fill out paperwork and help small business owners get this money. So that way they can keep their people paid no matter what the future holds. They can continue to make payroll and their people can continue to feed their families. And
Mm,
while we figure this out, that can continue. And I remember thinking, this is my way of contributing to society in a uncertain time. And, I mean, I'm not trying to like pretend like I'm a hero or something like that, but I do feel like there was a sense of purpose and a sense of being able to really help fellow man or fellow woman or fellow person in a time of need. And that felt really good. And I think it's funny because I've told people like, oh, people are like, oh, you're an accountant, it's so boring and blah blah blah. But I think if you find ways to make an impact and you have to kind of, build the story, but I think there are ways to make an impact. And I always tell people, like, I've driven a forklift as an accountant, and I got to go to South Bend, Indiana. I mean, here I am in Los Angeles. Get to go to South Bend, Indiana in the snow, go into cold storage, and kind of wade through cold storage in the snow. I've got other friends and people that I worked with at the big firm who had to go into a deep freeze wearing a suit and had to go count boxes of frozen shrimp in a deep freeze. Um, we had one client that was a shampoo company, a famous shampoo company, and they had to go to the shampoo factory where they had vats of shampoo, and they had to stick a stick down the vat to see how deep it was, and then use
Wow.
I think it's geometry to figure out the volume and figure out how much
Hmm.
value, how much dollar value of shampoo was in this massive vat. And so there's some interesting things that we can do. And for me, because of the firm I was at, I learned all about clothing and fashion and like how zippers are valued and on a nice shirt and all the little intricacies of
Mm.
that, which by the way, my wife loved because I would always be able to bring home samples and stuff like that. So that was a lot of fun. We would go to these fancy women's clothing stores that I didn't really even know who they were, but they're like, hey, we have some samples. Why don't you take these? So I would just, text my wife or call her because this was before text message, and I would say, hey, what is your size? Because they're giving away samples.
That's
So
awesome.
yeah, and you know what? There's ways to have fun. And
Mm,
I think that accounting is seriously underrated. I think that there is a tremendous opportunity for young people to come into accounting and make a real impact because there's a real need for young people to get into accounting. The need is never going to go away. They're like, oh, AI is going to take my
mm,
job or whatever. That's not happening.
mm,
At least in my view, it's not happening because they still are going to need people to be strategic.
mm.
And they don't, like I said, calculators can do all the math, but you have to really know the order of things and understand how things fit together.
Right. Right. And yeah, and I love the way you put it because it doesn't have to be like from the show The Office. It doesn't have to be like that little like they don't ha it doesn't have to be like you're stuck in that little corner like
Stuck in a
Kevin from The
cubicle.
Office just like typing with a jar of M&Ms. Like
Yeah.
you have field work and and I really like how it was so powerful your contribution. Like it just shows how like important and critical accounting is to all businesses, not just doesn't have to be just be like corporations or it's important to every business. It's like a critical
Yeah.
need. And
I
then
mean,
like
I
stepping up and serving the community is such a great way to spotlight that.
I remember how good it felt when there was, for example, I have some clients that are some nice restaurants here in Los Angeles, and the restaurants basically had to shut down. And they got to pay their people, like their cooks and their wait staff, and they get to like basically because that was what the program did. It gave the business owners money so they could keep paying payroll for a couple months,
Mm,
even though everyone was home without work.
right.
So that way people didn't have to go home and lose their houses and lose their, have all their phones get turned off and their internet get turned off and everything, no food to eat. They can stay home while we figured out what COVID was and they could feed their families. And I remember how good it felt to like help these owners of restaurants be able to make payroll and like it really felt like I was helping and it was really cool and that's something that still sticks with me as something that I was really proud of.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that and making note of that because I'm so glad we got to touch on that. That is such
Yeah.
a impactful impactful part of accounting, and especially in such a time of need for small businesses.
It was interesting. It was interesting for everyone, but a lot of people think, well, businesses, like Amazon, where it's like, well, they've got so much money. If they have to send everyone home for a month, it's just, you know, Amazon can absorb that. Well, maybe Amazon can, but not an electrician who's got like five guys or a restaurant who, is making ends meet. So it's not always cut and dry as that.
Mm. Well, thank you so much for sharing all this
You're welcome so
fascinating
much.
information about accounting and about being a business owner. I've learned so much. And I think
Awesome.
the way you framed it too is so relevant to people my age, to people who are interested in finding a comfortable career. And it
Yeah,
seems
I
like
mean,
accounting is such a strong vessel for that.
it's funny. There's something called tax Twitter, believe it or not, and people post to it, accountants post to it, and they do hashtag tax Twitter. And I've started reading it because it's nice. It's nice to see that there's like other people out there who are going through the same things. And one of them posted something so interesting, and they said, "Look, you know, no one who is an accountant is going to become Elon Musk, and they're not going to have 50 homes, and they're not going to have huge massive amounts of wealth, but they're going to have a nice, comfortable career,
Mm,
respectable career, have food in the table, going to have money in the bank, you're going to have clothes for your kids, and maybe a couple toys here and there." And it was so true, like it's not for the people who really want to absolutely go out there and slay the dragon. That more power to them. But if you just want something that is going to be steady, and you can find ways to make an impact, and to, you know, share in some wins here and there, and there are some cool opportunities to do that. Um, Accounting's not as bad as the rap it gets.
yeah, absolutely. Well,
Good. Well,
thank you so
hey,
much.
you're welcome so much. I just want to say I'm really impressed with your channel and what
Oh,
you're doing, uh interviewing people, and I think you're asking great questions,
mm.
and I really want to commend you, and this is why I was so excited to participate. Like, I really think it's cool.
But yeah, it
No
means so
problem.
much. It means so much coming from you. And I'm glad that you think what I'm doing is cool because I feel like
It is.
the more the I did it originally because like, oh, I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. But the older I get, now that I like am going to college, I'm like, wow, wait, I really don't know. Like, I've got a lot more skin in the game now. Like, what do I want to do with the start of my life? Like, where do I want to focus all all of my energy? And so the more the more I've done this, the more I feel like I've really appreciated how different perspectives really different perspectives really help. And like I never would have thought of accounting in this way before, in this light, as like a a vessel to to help and to build your own business and to like be your own boss. I never would have thought of it like that before. And so interviews like this are so helpful to me that I feel like it just really, the more I do it, the more value I feel like I get from it.
Well, good. I'm glad to hear that. And college is interesting because you get to really choose, and like I
Mm.
said, you probably have your parents whispering in your ear like, hey, Cade, you should try this or you should try that. But at the same time, you get to choose, like, am I going to do something that really interests me,
Mm.
or am I going to do something that I know I can turn into a career where I can make money for myself,
Mm.
or am I going to figure out a way to marry those two and do something that interests me and I can make a lot of money from. And that's the secret sauce, is finding a way to carve out a career for yourself, but also find a way to make it meaningful to you.
Hmm.
And there's a million billion different ways to do that. So it's just about,
Finding
finding
the
the one that
passion
works.
in the work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it
And
sounds
like you said,
great.
finding the purpose. Totally. Totally. I completely
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah. And you know what? I would say, if I could give you any unsolicited advice, I would say don't force it, because I certainly didn't really feel like I found my purpose until I was almost like 40. And I had that like moment, that COVID moment,
Mm.
where it was kind of like that, aha, here I'm like really contributing to like society. And like, and I've had like little glimpses of that before, but I don't think it's something that like you're gonna find. You'll be very lucky if you
Hmm.
find it at age 20 or at age
Hmm.
25, or whatever. So in the meantime, just find something you can tolerate.
Yeah. Yeah. Explore.
So explore. Great, great, great way of saying what I just said, but even better, explore.